Hey guys, welcome back. Welcome back again to DINFOS 2022 Social Media Forum. We're going to get right into mis and disinformation. I'm going to introduce you to Major Joseph Hewitt and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Patterson.
Hi, and good morning. I'm really excited to be here and I appreciate the invitation from DINFOS to be able to come here, share the stage, and talk about this very important topic of mis and disinformation. Before we get started, though, a couple of introductions. I'll start with myself. My name is Major Joe Hewitt. I've been in the Army over 24 years. I'm a prior service, former military intelligence professional. I've been trained in all-source intelligence, counterintelligence, human intelligence, open source intelligence, and digital network intelligence. All of that led to me becoming and selected as a cyber officer in 2015 as part of the new cyber branch. I'm currently assigned in the J39 Information Operations section of the Joint Force Headquarters Cyber Army Command down at Fort Gordon, Georgia. I hold 2 master's degrees, one in intelligence studies and the other in defense and strategic studies, in which I earned at the Naval War College. Over to you, sir.
Well, Major Hewitt, it's great to see you here today. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Kip Patterson. I am the Director for Public Affairs and Comstrat over at the Defense Information School. We train all the future PAOs and Comstrat professionals in the DoD. We do training with our partners, and I'm responsible for about 11 different courses over there at the school. Some of my students are sitting right here in the audience, and some of you are piping in online, so it's great to do that. Before I came to the Defense Information School, I was the PAO at Army Cyber Command, and before that I worked in NATO. And this concept and this topic of mis and disinformation really hits home, and it hits home to me personally and through my professional career, and it's something that we need to take very, very seriously. And today we're going to talk through mis and disinformation in the information environment, and we thought that the social media forum would be a great avenue to do that. But to do this and to do this well, it is going to be a team effort. It's going to be a collaborative effort. And so we want to model that and show that here. We've been talking for months about this, Major Hewitt and I, and we're excited to be here today. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So today we are going to talk through some of the joint doctrine and some of the publications that are already out there. So if you get asked the question, are we supposed to be countering mis and disinformation? Not only is the answer yes, but here's what it says in the publications. This is what it says in the joint regulations. Okay? We're also going to be mentioning and referencing some of your service-specific doctrine as well. So what we're talking about today comes from that area. Okay, another little disclaimer. We're going to show you here in just a second a few examples of open source disinformation from credible sources to talk through about the seriousness of this. But I know I don't need to tell you that. I know I don't need to tell you that this is serious, because I know that you're in the information fight right now and in this space and noticing things and reacting and countering yourselves. So I know I'm talking to the converted at this point. But the last point I want to make in this disclaimer is that we are talking about a framework, a way of thinking about things, maybe not the way. I've heard some great breakdowns of this very topic from our partners in NATO, from U.S. Army Europe and what they're doing out there, to other elements. I know the 16th Air Force is doing certain things. So this is pockets of the DoD, across the DoD. And then I know we have some audience members here today and online from across other agencies and across the government. And so this is going to be a combined thing that we need to work together on. So that's green. That's what we are going to do. Major Hewitt?
All right. I'm going to talk about the things that we aren't going to cover, right? So we're not going to talk about any document that's still emerging. We know there's pre-decisional publications that are out there. I'm excited for some of them that hopefully will be published in the near future, but we're going to steer clear of those. Next, this is an unclassified forum, so we're going to stay within the classified discussion. We're not going to disclose any trade craft secrets or sources and methods. And lastly, while the slide says we're going to stay in our lanes with regards to functions, what we are going to talk about is how each of those functions should collaborate and help counter mis and disinformation. Next slide, please.
Well, some of you may be interested to see, what exactly are we talking about? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples out there. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Is this an American post? Is this content coming from here in the United States? Well, we know that it's spread here in the United States, but where is it coming from? That's a good question, right? So in the era of information disorder and in a contested information environment, it's important to ask that question. And so these examples here are going to touch on that, okay? So in English, getting after some divisive topics, okay? But let's build this slide and let's reveal where this comes from, okay? That's where that came from. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Looks like an Instagram account. Looks like something that is sharing about a hot topic. It even is somewhat location-based, right? You can kind of see where this is saying the topic is resonating or that topic would work to message, right? There in Florida. But on further reveal, go ahead and build. That's where that's coming from, okay? So this is the disinformation in the space, okay? We're not just talking about fake profiles of your commanders on Facebook, okay? That's a thing, and I know that you're dealing with that, okay? But we're talking about something that's maybe a little bit more complex than that. Let's go to the next one. Here are two websites. English speaking, looks like news content, looks like it's about, key issues in the information environment, right? Black Matters US or blmnews.com, okay? Looks like something it's here, maybe hosted here, or something that people are sharing from as legitimate websites. Let's build the slide, okay? From the playbook, and this is being copied and used in different forms, okay? Is that surprising? Shouldn't be that surprising. There's been a lot of open discussions about this, and this is why we're here talking about this today. Let's go to the next slide.
All right. I know this chart is a bit of an eyesore for those in the audience. Hopefully those piping in virtually can see it a little better, but just bear with me. I'll walk you through it as we use it as a graphic in the background. So I want to remind everyone, information is one of America's instruments of national power, known as the DIME framework, D for diplomacy, I for information, M for military, and E for economic. And while the DoD is exercised as the military power, overt information has kind of been taken for granted. And it really wasn't until 2016 that we saw a shift in DoD policy, which put information more so at the forefront. Before I go to the timeline on the slide, I'd like to share a couple of key events and things that happened that might have led and served as the impetus for that change in policy. In 2004, Facebook was launched. In 2006, Twitter. 2007, the first iPhone. 2009, WhatsApp. Then you fast forward to 2014. You have the Russian use of disinformation and hybrid warfare and what they called the annexation of Crimea. Fast forward to 2016, you had the Islamic State and when they established the digital caliphate and were using explosively social media for recruitment and propaganda purposes. So you put that all into context as we look at some of the strategy. In 2016, DoD released the Strategy for Operations in the Information Environment. In 2018, General Dempsey, then the chairman of Joint's Chief of Staff, understood that information was so critical that he made it a joint function. After that, they updated through information as part of the strategy, the military strategy document. Fast forward to 2018 and the release of the joint concept for operations in the information environment, in which that document replaced the original 2016 concept. Of course, we had to update JP30 for operations to include information as part of that strategy as well. And then what I believe as the most critical in 2019, when it was first published, was the DoD Directive 3115.18, which is the DoD access and use of publicly available information. That was again updated in 2020. Why I think it's so critical for an operator, non-intelligence professional, none of the other documents that were released really gave any authority. They were only concepts. They were only strategies. This document allowed us a better understanding as an operator of what we can and can't do within the information environment. So that's why I think that was so critical. Next slide, please.
Well, now that you've got some of the publications, regulations, and DODIs, which I'm sure you're going to go home and print out and have right there at your desk, right? Let's talk about two myths, okay, that I need your help to debunk. Myth number one, PA and other functions don't work together. Look, we're on stage together, all right? We can work together. In fact, not only can we work together, we should be working together, right? Let's take a look at JP 3-Tac 6.1 in public affairs, where it says that public affairs is not only we consume intelligence. That means intelligence products are useful to us, but we also provide information, and we help the commanders understand the information environment in which they're operating in. This has been part of what we do all along, right? We're advisors to the command about what's going on in the information environment, okay? But we should be doing this in collaboration. We see in DODI 5400 TAC 13 that sometimes PA is the supported element. In other words, we get support from the intel community, okay, on certain kinds of questions. So this is a collaborative thing. Help us debunk that myth. Take a sledgehammer to any walls that you have in your back at home and make sure that you're building relationships and breaking down some of those walls and barriers. And that there's two sides to that, okay, making sure that we do those things collaboratively. So the second myth, next slide, is that we alone can counter mis and disinformation all by ourselves as PA Comstrat, okay? Now, under the DODI 5400 13 on PA operations, yes, we will do it, of course, okay? We do that in all sorts of ways. We've been doing it for a long time, right? How many of you have ever had to call a reporter back to correct the record, right? That's an aspect of countering misinformation. How many of you have set up a follow-on interview to maybe clarify something that was unclear? Of course, right? Maybe we've pushed out information or created information to counter misinformation, okay? It gets a little bit more complicated in some of the examples I showed earlier, though, about disinformation. And we'll talk a little bit later about authorities and things of that nature. But we need to work together to counter mis and disinformation collaboratively. You'll notice that the Marine Corps, leaning forward, has called information a warfighting function. So the Marine Corps believes that it's every Marine's duty to help with in that information warfighting function, okay? So again, just referencing a few different things here, but we are going to have to counter mis and disinformation together, and we'll talk a little bit about some frameworks about that. So let's go on to the next slide.
Again, I apologize, another chart that may be hard to read, but I'll walk you through it, right? So this is a graphic straight out of JP20, which is the intelligence publication. And I really love it because it provides in the background the operational environment and then the tasks which need to take place for something from data in the environment to become information and then intelligence. I hit earlier on the publication that made it so critical for operators to be able to search and use the access of the PAI, publicly available information. And it's because it's so critical that the intelligence professionals, law enforcement, and others had guiding documents to tell them how to do things, right? So everything from the left of intelligence is information and can be done by operators now. Everything to the right of information is intelligence. It takes that intelligence professional to analyze it, use their various means to check the content and validate it. And in the end, that's what the commander wants. They want to be able to have an information advantage over the adversary and ultimately decision dominance. So those are two terms I'd like to share with you. First being information advantage. It's a term that we use in Army Cyber Command. It's a condition when a force holds the initiative in terms of relevant actor behavior, situational understanding, and decision-making through the use of all military capabilities. And then decision dominance is a desired state in which a commander can sense, understand, decide, and act faster than the adversary. I'll share another framework that we use called the SUDA loop. Some of you in the military may have heard of the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. We use what's called the SUDA loop. Again, sense, understand, decide, act, and assess. So why am I sharing this with you? Why is it important? It's important to understand the nuance between the various terms, because again, as a field grade, I've been taught words have meanings. And those words trace back through legal authorities who can do what and how. Again, to support military operations. So,
All right.
next slide.
Next slide. Okay. So, keeping that framework in mind, we have everything that is to the left there of data and information. We consume data all the time. Okay? You're consuming data right now. You're consuming information right now through this. When you open your phone and you scroll through and what you're looking at. When you are operating your home station social media platforms for your organization and somebody writes a comment, you have just essentially consumed data, right? When you've interpreted that, oh, what did they mean? Did they like it? Did they not like the post? You've turned that into information, okay? And you've turned that understanding into, well, we should post more content like that, right? Or we should do less like that, or I need to respond, or I don't need to respond. Well, as I, have kind of outlined here in a framework, there's actually a lot of data out there, initial contact with this information in the information environment that we may not fully understand. And that is a risk, okay? It is a risk to not fully understand it. If we do not understand it, we have, in this very simple graphic, we have the risk of misunderstanding that data, misinterpreting it into information, and therefore not responding appropriately or responding poorly within that. Again, let's go to a good example, right? I've seen a comment on Facebook. I know where it's coming from. I understand what's going on. And all that this audience is really asking for is just a link to the truth or something that I can provide here at my organization. Okay, that is data rightly understood, information rightly understood, and it creates a good response. Awesome. Information misunderstood may be something that, you're in the middle of a comms crisis and you're not exactly sure where everything is coming from, where these rumors are started, where these attacks are coming from, where this is coming from. It may be useful to start asking the questions and coordinating with other information capabilities, because at that point you are in an operation. You are in a situation, okay? PA Comstrat, the information environment, it doesn't stop, okay? And so as you are communicating, as we are communicating within this space, it's really important that we understand the voices and what's going on in those spaces. And if we do not, we run the risk of poorly responding, maybe responding outside of our lane or not responding at all when something should be responded to. Again, I'm keeping this a little bit vague on purpose, but you can see where this ties in both from day-to-day operations or at large scale. So just kind of a concept, it is a contested environment. There's a lot of false narratives going on out there. There's a lot of things going on out there, and we want to first sense and understand before we respond. Okay? Let's go to the next slide and kind of draw this out a little bit more. So, why were they 3 buckets? Well, unclear data in the IE, right, needs to be interpreted and understood in order for us to respond appropriately. And in order for that to happen, we may need to rely on other parts of the information capabilities. So, ask the question, who else is in the OODA loop? Okay? Who else can sense, understand, in order to make a decision, to act, and then to be able to assess? Who else is in my OODA loop here at my home unit? Another question, are critical commander information requirements developed? Okay? When does something become a crisis? We all have the CCIR typically in our organizations that if it hits the media, the commander probably wants to know. That's a normal CCIR. We're used to those. Okay? But what if it's not in the media? But what if it still is a communication issue? What if we're sensing it in the information environment in social media and it hasn't hit big national news yet? It might. It might. So before it ever hits there, how quickly is our OODA loop? Do we have our CCIRs developed? Do we understand what we're trying to get after in this way? And then finally, are those elements equipped? Okay. So on that note, this concept and these discussions have been held at very high levels. Here you see 2 field grades talking about this. And our speaker before us talked about how conversations are being had at the lowest levels. I am looking at an audience full of practitioners, okay? People that are doing this at the ground level, okay? You are operating in social media, you are helping to be the voice of your command, okay? That's where we're at. Content creators, PAO, Comstrat, advisors, we're in the fight, okay? So, down at our level, we got to start working together and start countering mis and disinformation and get some reps in at the gym on this, okay? And so this is the level at which we want to talk about this and work through it. So what are we trying to give the commander? Truth. Truth to be able to respond appropriately. So one framework to think about is as we are thinking through what is this information that I'm looking at, is it harmful? Is it not harmful? Is it what kind of a problem am I dealing with as I'm looking at this information in the information environment? One way to think of it is inaccuracies or jokes, right? Who has an account, who's watched Duffel Blog or any of those kinds of things, right? So sometimes things are very clearly like, hey, this is funny or this is a parody or something like that, okay? Inaccuracies, we already talked about correcting the record. We know how to do that, okay? That's maybe in that cell. There is a Venn diagram, however, where pranks and jokes start to overlap into harmful activity. Harmful activity that affects our units, our commands, our people, our family members, and we need to start taking that seriously if we're not already. When does that line cross over into criminal activity? And are we getting at the truth of that? And I know we have some law enforcement on who are watching and are participating in our audience today. Okay? When does this thing go to CID? When does this go to crime? Okay? Or could it be? And then the third aspect. When is this a deliberate attack on the cognitive aspects of the DoD, our people, our nation, etc.? and that's a whole other conversation. But the point is that to get after the truth of this unclear data and information in the information space, we're going to have to work together to get truth and start to define these things and work together so that proper responses to it can be done in time, at the right place, under the right authorities, and within the right permissions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Major Hewitt, my IC counterpart here.
Thank you, sir. So you never know where you're going to end up in the fleet or the field. So we don't want to tell you you can rely on certain resources. So we just want to give you a framework, some things to think about if you're presented a problem. So I would recommend first you think through that pseudo loop that I mentioned. Determine who else might have equities in that problem set. Next, you would want to consider who else has the authority. We kind of mentioned the various authorities, right? As an example, intelligence teams are out in the operational, they're operating in the intelligence information environment, trying to understand and baseline what's going on in order to answer PIRs for the commander. Next, you might ask yourself, who has the mission? And this is a critical point. Just because you have the authority to do something doesn't always mean you have the mission. An example there is our information operations personnel are operating and understanding within the information environment, and they might be able to help you with your problem set. This one may seem obvious, but it's just a reminder. Don't try to look at everything. That's clearly going to be too overwhelming. So try to filter it, neck it down to what's affecting you within your area of operations. And then lastly, what is the impact? What is the risk to the force? What is the risk to that mission? Or what is the risk to brand? Once you kind of work through those different filters, that'll help you determine where do you go next to get that help. You could go to the intel folks, you could go to the operations folks, or you might go external and deliver something to the FBI or Department of Homeland Security. One key thing that I want to highlight, though, is that the golden hour, whether truth or disinformation prevails within the information environment, is dependent largely on one key factor, and that's speed. And of course, as a field grade, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a military strategist. So incorporating Sun Tzu, in order to understand, you must know yourself, your enemies, as well as your area of operations. Next slide. All right. Lots of words on a slide, so I'll let you read that while I kind of recap some of the things that we've talked about. The various publications that were updated since 2016 in order to tackle the challenges with just information. Here, what you're seeing on the screen and reading is direct from our Commander-in-Chief. He's charging us as defenders of the Constitution. He doesn't point out any function, public affairs, cyber, intel. It's all of us to defeat the lies. And I'd like to remind you what Clint Watts, who's well known in the influence and information operations domain, put so well. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Cyber and Homeland Security. And here's what he said: that people believe what they see and hear first. People believe and see what they see and hear often. And then people believe that which has no rebuttal. And I understand, I'm not a professional in the ComStrat or PA field, but I understand that's where you come in. That's where you're charged. In speaking the truth and sharing the nation's strategic narratives and creating the echo chambers of good information, which is grounded in rigorous academic research and investigative interviews. And finally, do what we're doing here today. Break out of your tribes. Don't wait for an invitation to be at the seat of the table with the commander. Go talk to the intelligence professionals. Go talk to the operations folks. Go understand what's happening so that you can help each other out. This is absolutely a complex, multi-domain environment, and we need all hands on deck. Thank you.
All right. Well, at this point, we'll open it up for some questions. looking forward to that.
So for misinformation and disinformation to take hold, you need a receptive audience. So how does the work take place today, or how can we do our jobs better when the audience is so receptive to the messages they're receiving from bad actors?
Yes, so the reception of that and what we're doing. There is a term called inoculation, and that term kind of works with understanding. So we need to make sure that people know how to look at information that they are receiving. For example, I know the Marine Corps has started to talk through, and it's actually going out and looking at their ComStrat professionals as being the people to help teach media literacy to the Marine Corps. Okay. Other services are also looking at that, and I know that across the DoD, there is we're looking at that. So. It's really important to know what you're looking at, and probably have been told before, like probably read the thing before you share it, right? So there's that thing, right? That's just one step. But educating our people, not only doing training with like media training to make sure that they can go out and conduct an interview. That's only one part of the job as a PA ComStrat professional, right? How are we also helping them understand what it is they're looking at and reading as well? So that's one way that we can, again, add value at the local level within that. So I think awareness, again, one of the reasons we're standing up here today and talking about this, I think awareness is key. Some basic media literacy is a way. And then just know that, here at the Defense Information School, a lot of your PA ComStrat professionals that are coming through our qualification course, they're getting taught about information disorder, this whole topic of information mis and dis and malinformation and what some of those definitions are. And they are involved during their exercise portion to work in an information operations working group and understand what things that they're supposed to take to those meetings and come away with from those meetings. So that may be they may surprise some folks, okay? If they've come through the Defense Information School, 10 years ago or so, you weren't part of an information operations working group and understanding your role in that, but now you do. So I hope that answers your question. Just a couple of ways to look at that.
Thank you.
So I'd like to piggyback, if I could, just as a recommendation too, talking with one of my colleagues in one of the breaks, that it's important to pair up as a PA professional, pair up with an information operation specialist, right? And continue to do what Colonel Patterson recommended, right, is continue to inoculate, continue to teach. You can't do it enough. You have to ensure, partnered with that information operations professional who can tell you about the influence operations that our adversary is absolutely doing in order to sow discord. That's their purpose, right? So they are doing what we talked about, using the information environment against us, because we are an open nation, right? So absolutely recommend pairing up and just sharing that message. Of course, get it cleared by your ethics and lawyers, right? But train the force, train the force, train the force.
Thank you.
Hi. So my question goes back to the case studies that you showed at the top of your presentation. So because we've seen the ability to attribute some of the misinformation and disinformation efforts on social media, I was just wondering if there is any kind of central repository for the defense community and or a shared one with the intelligence community where if there are social media memes that experts have noted are recurring and are part of an orchestrated effort, that members of these communities can refer to the library and kind of know if we're dealing with legitimate people with grievances or trolls or bots. And if it doesn't exist, has there been any thought to creating a tool like that?
Do you know of any repositories?
I would imagine it would be petabytes of information if we tried to store all of the memes that have had mis or disinformation. Yeah, I would just reference Department of State. There's the Global Engagement Center. They are charged with countering mis and dis as a foreign aspect of it. They've got some great resources. The cybersecurity website also. They've got to do a new mis, dis, and malign team that they put together that's supporting countering election security challenges there. Lots of tools and resources there, but unfortunately, I don't know of one that collects all of the current, ongoing misinformation, disinformation.
Yeah, and there's private companies out there that have also released information and pointed to things as well. But that's a great question, and I don't know of a DoD resource quite like that. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the studio audience?
You have a question?
Morning, gentlemen. Just a question for you, sir, especially what lessons in research can we as public affairs professionals learn from the intelligence community?
That's a great question. I will tell you it's not easy. Nobody gave me a handbook to everything I presented here. That's all through my experience in the various jobs that I've held over the last few years. No one's going to do it for you. I hope with the forthcoming doctrine that we didn't talk about does provide some guidance and some guide rails for us in the future. But it's going to take, again, this collaborative effort. That's why we're really highlighting it, that you've got to work together. You've got to open the books, the manuals, the pubs, the doctrine, and really trace back what can I do, how can I do it, and who can help me. That's really the lesson learned that I could give you. Is it's not easy, you know that, but that's the lesson I can give you is hard work and working together. Don't be afraid to reach out to your peers in other organizations.
We teach, so we talked about the pseudo loop, we talked about the OODA loop. If you're an old artilleryman like me, then you know about D3 alpha and detect and that loop. And then if you have a communications background or you have a degree in communications, you know about RPI, right? So research, plan, implement, evaluate. Okay, so it's the same. Look, it's the same thing, right? But this ability to research is really, really key for us in the PA Comstrat community. Okay, so a lot of that, and when you talk about research, especially at the collegiate level, the big thing is what's your first question? What are you trying to answer, right? And so having really good, clear questions up front, and some of those things need to be, what am I looking at? Where is this coming from? And then who else can help define this? Because commanders do care, okay? They do. So I'll leave it at that.
I will piggyback off of that, sir, and just to help answer some of the question that was asked. It was a great question. Something that I've told folks, it's always easy to remember the ABCs, right? So ABCD. A, analyze the information. What is it that information is trying to get you to do? Is it trying to get you upset, react? What's its purpose? B is for biases. Everyone has them. Be cognizant of your own, because that's what the adversary does. They play on your biases in order to spread their narrative, get you to buy into what they're selling, right? C, check the content, the source, right? Is it a duffel blog, as we mentioned earlier? Is it satire, or is it a legitimate source? Some of those websites we showed, you may think, or maybe your friends or family may think something looks legitimate because it says The Real News Now, or Veterans Today, or whatever it is, right? But there's a way to go back and check, what is the actual source? And then D, data literacy. I'm not saying you have to be a data scientist, right? I'm in the cyber field. I'm clearly not a data scientist. But you can look at the statistics that are being presented just kind of peel back that onion a little bit and understand that every statistic is used for a narrative. So just try to understand and see if you can look at the whole picture and not just what they're presenting.
One of the things that we've struggled with, I'm at the National Defense University,
Yes.
is the speed at which something moves from a tweet to kind of the fringe to suddenly it's a news story, and suddenly, for example, the Secretary of Defense is getting questioned on it.
Right.
How do we move to tighten up our response to get ahead of the narrative when things are moving so fast? I guess, how do we get it up to that senior leader level where they can act on it and counter it as quickly as possible?
That's a great question, and again, that's a great question that so many have asked, and that's why we're here today. We talked a little bit about the golden hour, that speed aspect of it. Years ago, when the main threat to our force being deployed was IEDs, right, improvised explosive devices. Does everybody remember if you were deploying to theater, you had to do counter IED training? So years ago, I deployed with a medical unit, and even my dentist had to do counter IED training. That's how serious we took counter IED. A collaborative effort, obviously, from everything from trying to find new materials to withstand blasts to medical advancements to all sorts of things going to that event. We need to take this just as seriously. And to do that, we could look at a model in which everybody is a sensor, right? And knows how to get that information back through to good channels, okay? Let people know what's going on, what you're hearing, what you're doing. And then maybe that is one mechanism by which, at a minimum, you as a PAO aren't the only thing scanning your information environment, right? And then that might help with that process. That's one way to do it.
Thanks.
Okay? So this is a complex problem with very complex, there will be complex solutions.
I tried to piggyback on that as well, that just as a reminder, we kind of talked about it, just want to keep driving it home, to partner with your intelligence and information operations professionals. They are keeping the pulse on those narratives. So to try to get left of click is working with them to understand what would be that next thing, right? Because they're already thinking about it, absolutely. That's be my recommendation. Stay tied in with them.
Absolutely. Some of our allies and partners are on this too. I don't know if you ever go to the Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, which is in Riga, Latvia, and they have a lot of information that they produce and put out, out on the web about narratives and things that are going on in those spaces too. So we have partners and allies in this as well. So again, I know you just see two Army officers up here. Between the two of us, we have a lot of joint and combined time throughout our careers, and I learned a lot working out with in Latvia years ago. So there's a lot of other things going on out there, private partners, DHS, others that we can utilize and understand.
Gentlemen, another question from NDU. So how does the DoD view the role responsibility of its higher education institutions in the information environment, considering that we must accommodate for both academic freedom and cybersecurity and InfoSec? Is that something you can address?
Yeah. Can you repeat that one more time? Just nice and loud.
How does the DoD view the role responsibility of its higher education institutions in the information environment?
Right. So, when I first came to the Defense Information School, I came as an instructor and then just last year became the director. I clearly recognize that my limited role is to just make sure that those students graduate well with the skills that they've got. But of course, burning in the back of my brain is, where was that training when I went to the Command General Staff College? Or where is that in other forms of education across what we call PME, or professional military education, right? Why can't we teach digital media literacy at basic training when new recruits come in? Okay, and so I do think that the larger DoD educational apparatus is looking at this from the highest levels, you know, your war colleges, your advanced education, all the way down to your basic training, cadet command, things like that. I do believe that we're looking at this. I don't want to speak outside my lane on this, but that's, you know, it's going to take all of us to get after this. So they're taking it seriously. I know that this topic is coming up in a lot of different ways. It's a nice vague way of saying that. But how about from cybersecurity, intel, anything that you're seeing out there?
Yes, sir. I want to highlight that these are discussions and topics within our PME, our professional military education, at each level, at the junior grade, mid-grade, and higher. Another thing that's also being done in regards to the operations in the information environment is being taught to newly promoted colonels that are going to be taking command and or generals. They do come through Army Cyber Command, in which they get a briefing on a lot of the stuff that's at the classified level to help them before they take command. So I know it's being done.
Good question.
And we didn't talk about it, but again, the emerging doctrine is forthcoming, which will be taught at PME.
Any other questions from our studio audience? Nope. All right, well, gentlemen, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining us here at DINFOS Live. DINFOS Live.
DINFOS, this has been great. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, guys, we're going to take a little break here, and we'll be back this afternoon for more sessions.